Taking Social Emotional Learning Schoolwide, the Formative 5 Success Skills for Students and Staff. Written by Thomas R. Herr. Herr argues in his thesis that learning environments can prosper if schools implement social-emotional learning, develop student character, and cultivate the formative 5. The formative 5 are empathy, self-control, integrity, embracing diversity, and grit. To best support his thesis, on page 170, Herr mentions that teachers are the most important factor in enhancing the student experience in school. The school's culture impacts the work of teachers and administrators. He then goes on to add that principals contribute to this cycle by working with the teachers to create a culture of trust and growth. Finally, Herr concludes with the argument that educators should excel in preparing students for life outside of school by embracing social-emotional learning and the formative 5. The Components of Culture section on page 50 presents the concept by Michael D. Watkins that culture is the carrier of meaning. Herr then proceeds to add information about John Coleman's model of culture to help determine our perceptions and behaviors. In the Examples and Action section on page 65, Herr provides examples of 6 schools that ensure social-emotional learning in the formative 5 were both meaningfully addressed in their missions and practice. On page 129, Herr insists on showcasing the school community narrative as he uses newsletters to feature information about the teachers and entice parents into supporting the district. An example of planned curriculum is on page 22 with the pseudonym of Mr. Dieter, who would meet with groups of students to report on their homework progress and review their individual goals for the class. On page 132, Herr uses the example of students at Essex Elementary in Massachusetts using physical mood meters to determine how they were feeling at various times throughout the day. An example of hidden curriculum is mentioned on page 33 when Herr explores the use of Walter Mischel's famous marshmallow test, which generated public awareness about self-control. When educators left the room, they would challenge students not to touch the marshmallows, and if they left them alone, they'd get an extra one. Researchers found that students who waited to eat their marshmallows scored an average of 210 points higher on their SAT scores 14 years later. While Herr presented few arguments for more of a social reconstruction path, most of his practices align with the learner-centered approach. The best example of when this approach comes to fruition is when Herr mentions on page 53 that successful schools are the ones where the school culture is built from the inclusion of everyone. Herr prefers capitalizing on everyone's creativity, investment, and energy to improve the schools. This contributes to the notion of being learner-centered because students that feel included in the classroom are the ones that serve as the active agents of their knowledge. If Herr had to choose a contemporary curriculum that he best aligned with, he would most likely choose the practice of understanding by design. I say this because he is a hands-on educator. Page 34, Herr states, the marshmallow test resonates because of its simplicity and implications. He goes on to question the concept only to note that self-control isn't hereditary. Herr is the kind of educator that likes to get to the nitty-gritty of projects. Herr considers the learning goals of a project before engaging in it. This aligns with key concepts of the understanding by design process. Herr prefers a learner-centered approach. Some items reflect personalized learning in his work. The story about Mrs. Knight and Wan on pages 20 to 21 presents the importance of personalized learning. Letting the students guide their education by finding what approaches work best for them is the way he prefers to teach. The trend of cultural literacy is not one that Herr would get behind. He values educators that have strong convictions that are never reluctant to share their beliefs. On page 23, it reflects the story of Miss Laley, who would never stick to the status quo and educate students only about what matters to the dominant culture. She would instead present students with the ideas that would help them better understand the faults in education. Thomas Herr believes that social-emotional learning relies heavily on building connections with students. The only way this is possible is through individualized curriculums, not the scripted ones. Herr described on page 166 that the staff who implement these strategies will come to respect and care for one another, and their actions with students will become more positive and trusting. After reading this novel, I find and that education through the lens of social-emotional learning and the formative 5 is in the hands of the learner. The lessons taught in school should hold value inside and outside of the classroom. I also appreciate how Her mentions on page 144 that we should use the halls to inform and elicit, engage families, and embrace diversity. The best teachers and professors I've had are the ones who taught me life lessons. I felt included in their classes, and that someday I will be capable of earning my doctorate and leaving an impact on the lives of students the way they did for me. In summation, Thomas Her believes that education should be for everyone. On page 6, he mentions that everyone gains when adults in school work on developing social-emotional learning and the formative 5. As someone who is very learner-centered, I agree that utilizing these tools will impact education to allow students to feel like they can make it. I'll end with brief facts about me. I am a learner-centered because having access to educators who taught like this allowed me to graduate from college. I am the first in my family with a bachelor's degree in communication and a social justice minor. Having access to grad school educators who think like Thomas Her gives me the privilege to say that I am halfway through earning the first master's degree in my family, and that someday I will be the Dr. Short.